Gemini, why do these people admire you but don't admit it? Have you ever felt a strange tension in the room? An unspoken gaze, an energy that follows your every move, yet never says a word? You sense it intuitively. People observe you, mirror your ideas, draw from your energy, and yet they say nothing. No compliments, no acknowledgement, just silence. Or worse, subtle criticisms that never quite make sense. Why? Today, I invite you to look deeper into a truth your heart has suspected for a long time. You are admired, not in whispers of flattery, but in the quiet tremor of envy, not with open celebration, but with careful imitation. Gemini, your presence disrupts the air around you, not because you're loud or confrontational, but because you embody something others spend their whole lives trying to achieve: effortless brilliance. You walk into a space and shift the energy without trying. And for some, that's inspiring. But for others, it's threatening. This isn't about ego. It's about energetic reality. You likely notice it in colleagues who borrow your ideas but never credit you. In friends who seek your insight but shrink away when you shine. In family members who applaud others loudly but meet your success with passive dismissal. And you ask yourself, am I imagining this? Or is there something they see in me that they don't want to name? Today's message is your answer. This is not in your head. It is in your light. Before we dive into this revealing journey, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your energy here nourishes this space. And together we'll uncover the subtle but powerful dynamics shaping your relationships and your self-worth. Gate 1, the mirror effect. When your light triggers insecurity. Gemini, your mind is sharp, your energy electric, your presence unmistakable, even when you're not trying to be seen. That's the paradox of your influence. You don't force attention, but you receive it, not because you demand it, but because your very existence reflects something others cannot ignore. And that reflection, it acts like a mirror, one that not everyone is ready to face. You see, some people don't react to you. They react to the parts of themselves they see or don't see in you. Your spontaneity reminds them of their restraint. Your charm reveals their stiffness. Your creative thinking exposes their linear habits. And rather than owning that discomfort, they project it, not through open hostility, but through subtle micro-rejections, a mocking tone, a backhanded compliment, the praise that somehow never quite reaches your ears. This is a mirror effect in action. You're not just triggering curiosity, you're triggering self-evaluation. And for those who haven't cultivated self-worth, your light can feel like a threat rather than inspiration. So instead of celebrating you, they silence you. Instead of lifting you up, they strategically step back, not because they don't care, but because your growth unsettles the stagnant places they haven't dared confront. Take the example of Jonah, a Gemini who worked in a collaborative team setting. He often came up with unique ideas, effortlessly connected people, and could lighten any tense moment with his humor. But over time, he noticed something odd. His contributions would be passed over in meetings, only to reappear later as someone else's. When praised by clients, his own teammates would grow strangely quiet. When he expressed pride in a successful project, he'd be met with disinterest or worse, passive-aggressive critiques. Don't let it go to your head. Jonah began to wonder, was he doing something wrong? Was he being arrogant without realizing it? The truth, Gemini, is that Jonah wasn't arrogant. He was radiant. And that radiance didn't fit into the script others had written for themselves. They couldn't imitate his ease, so they questioned his authenticity. They couldn't match his spark, so they tried to dim it. This wasn't about Jonah being too much. It was about others feeling like too little in comparison. And perhaps you've lived this, too. You've had ideas taken without acknowledgement. You've watched others get celebrated for things you pioneered. You felt the cold shoulder from people who secretly follow everything you do. You've sensed the friction not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something right. Gemini, let this truth land gently in your heart. Your essence is not up for negotiation. The admiration others refuse to express doesn't make it any less real. The light you carry is not only visible, it's impactful. You're not just being seen, you're being studied. And while some may respond with fear or jealousy, that's not your weight to carry. Instead of shrinking, you're being called to expand, not to prove anything, but to embody everything you are. Because here's what happens when you stop internalizing others' projections. You begin to see yourself clearly again. You realize that discomfort in others is not a sign you're out of alignment. It's often confirmation that you're aligned with something they haven't yet dared to claim. So the next time someone's reaction confuses you, ask yourself, is this truly about me, or is my light reflecting something they're still hiding from? More often than not, you'll find your answer not in their silence, but in your own clarity. Gemini, you don't need their applause to shine. You only need your truth and your willingness to stand in it, even when others look away. Gate 2, the hidden language of jealousy. Gemini, jealousy rarely announces itself by name. It rarely enters a room declaring, "I envy you." Instead, it whispers. It dresses itself in sarcasm. It hides behind concern. It arrives with compliments that land like small stings. "You're always lucky. Must be nice to have it easy. You think you're so special, don't you?" And because you're sensitive, because you care, you've likely internalized some of these barbs, wondering if perhaps you were, in fact, doing too much. But today, I want you to see clearly, these comments aren't feedback. They're code. They're encrypted confessions from people who can't fully accept that you're shining in spaces they haven't yet dared to explore. Jealousy is not just about wanting what you have. It's about resenting how naturally you have it. Gemini, your brilliance is rarely loud, but it's unmistakable. It's the way you bring levity to heavy conversations. The way your curiosity makes others feel interesting and seen. The way you wear contradictions serious and silly, deep in light, without trying to resolve them. You move through life with a rhythm that doesn't always follow the rules. And those who crave certainty, control, or status often find this both fascinating and infuriating. They admire you, yes, but they admire you from a distance they'll never admit. Take Clara, a Gemini who once had a close-knit group of friends. Warm, fun, supportive, or so it seemed, until Clara began to change. She started expressing more of her truth. She wrote publicly, dressed more boldly, took up space in ways she hadn't before. And slowly, the tone shifted. Friends who once cheered her on began to tease her behind half-smiles. Who do you think you are now? You're so intense lately. You used to be more chill. At first, Clara dimmed her light to stay connected. She softened her language, muted her passions, made herself easier to digest. But her soul grew restless, because what they wanted was a version of her that didn't make them question their own limits. And so Clara left, not out of anger, but out of clarity. She stopped mistaking proximity for loyalty. She stopped mistaking criticism for truth. She stopped waiting for people who couldn't celebrate her to finally understand her. And in doing so, she made space for a new circle. People who weren't intimidated by her light, but nourished by it. Gemini, maybe you've had your own Clara moments where people you trusted turned cold, where being more of yourself somehow made others less supportive, where your achievements seemed to invite distance instead of closeness. It's a painful paradox, because your success wasn't a weapon, it was a celebration. But in the insecure hearts of others, it landed like a threat. So how do you respond? You don't shrink. You don't explain. You don't apologize for joy you earned or light you were born to carry. You translate the hidden language of jealousy, not as judgment, but as information. You begin to notice who stays silent when you shine, who always finds a flaw in your joy, who only engages when you're struggling. These patterns aren't coincidences. They're clues. And once you see them, you free yourself. You stop seeking open acknowledgement from people whose admiration is tied to their ego. You stop hoping that the ones who copy your ideas will one day thank you. You stop waiting for those who dismiss your strengths to finally recognize them. Because you now understand jealousy is not about you. It's about what your existence awakens in others. Let them wrestle with it. Let them project. Let them talk. You keep rising. Because when you no longer need their permission to be extraordinary, you reclaim the energy you once wasted trying to be palatable. You become magnetic not just for your light, but for your refusal to dim it. Gemini, some people are too afraid to praise what they can't replicate. Let them be. Your path isn't to be understood by everyone. It's to walk in your truth so fully that you no longer need to be. Gate 3. What their criticism reveals about their admiration. Gemini, have you ever noticed how the criticism aimed at you often sounds strangely familiar? Not because it's true, but because it mirrors something you value most deeply about yourself? You're called too much when you're being expressive, inconsistent when you're being curious, superficial when you're savoring beauty. And behind every distorted label is a confession. Someone has seen something in you they don't know how to name with reverence, so they attack it instead. This is the paradox of being admired in silence. The very people who wish they could be like you will often try to reshape you, not openly, but through comments, questions, tones of voice, or glances that all say the same thing. Don't shine so bright. You're making me uncomfortable. Gemini, your nature is expansive. You were never meant to be contained. Your ideas, your contradictions, your capacity to pivot, to experiment, to change your mind and still make it sound brilliant. That's your gift. But to someone who has built their identity on being consistent or correct or in control, your freedom feels like chaos. Your range feels like threat. Your joy feels like arrogance. And so, their admiration must be disguised. They'll call you scattered when really they marvel at your range. They'll call you attention-seeking when really they long for your presence. They'll say you're trying too hard, when deep down, they wonder how you make effort look effortless. And most of all, they'll frame your gifts as flaws. Because accepting your gifts would mean admitting theirs are still dormant. Let's return to your experience. Think of the last time someone criticized you, harshly, vaguely, or condescendingly. Now ask, what quality of mind might they be secretly responding to? What may reflect something they suppressed, denied, or longed for? You'll find that most destructive criticism isn't about you at all. It's about containment. It's about attempting to bring you back into a mold you outgrew the moment you chose authenticity. But here's where it gets powerful. The moment you stop taking their criticism personally, you take your power back. You begin to realize that criticism reveals far more about the speaker than the subject. You no longer absorb their doubt. You witness it. You observe it. You translate it. And you move forward unshaken. Consider Ava, a Gemini who was constantly told she talked too much, especially by family members. She internalized it for years, thinking maybe her thoughts weren't valuable. But when she began writing, sharing her voice online, mentoring younger creatives, something shifted. The same people who used to criticize her voice began sending her messages in private. You inspire me. I wish I could say the things you say. How are you always so eloquent? Ava didn't change. They did, or rather, their mask slipped. And this is what's happening around you now, Gemini. The people who criticize you harshest may, in fact, be your most attentive audience. The ones who roll their eyes might also bookmark your posts. The ones who joke about your drama may secretly wish they had your courage to express emotion. So, what do you do with this revelation? You stop shrinking to avoid criticism. You stop explaining your light to those committed to misunderstanding it. You stop waiting for applause from those who are clapping for you in private, but resisting you in public. You keep showing up in your voice, your joy, your insight, your fluidity, your radiance. And you let the world adjust to your presence, not the other way around. Because Gemini, the deeper truth is this. Their criticism is your confirmation. They don't mock what they don't notice. They don't resist what doesn't move them. They don't attack what doesn't challenge their limits. So shine. Let them whisper. Let them twist your essence into something they can name. You know who you are, and soon, so will everyone else. Gate 4. Recognizing the imitation behind the distance. Gemini, there's something almost poetic and quietly painful about being copied by people who refuse to credit you. They keep their distance, rarely praise you, often question your choices. And yet, somehow, their new wardrobe feels familiar. Their ideas echo yours. Their tone, their timing, their aesthetic, eerily reflective. It's not coincidence. It's concealed admiration. And it's been happening longer than you've realized. You've probably brushed it off. Maybe even told yourself, it's not that deep. But it is. Because energy doesn't lie, and neither does pattern. The ones who subtly mock you are often the ones watching you most closely, not with hate, but with desire they don't know how to express. They want something you carry naturally. And instead of asking, "How did you find that?" they try to take it silently, hoping you won't notice. But you do. The pause before they change the subject when you're talking about your passions. The way they show up wearing a version of the outfit you wore last week. The phrases they once laughed at that now fill their social media posts. The places they visit right after you mention them. At first, you might feel flattered, but eventually it starts to sting. Because what you're craving isn't imitation, it's intimacy. You want to be seen, not just studied, celebrated, not copied in silence. Gemini, your essence isn't just inspiring, it's magnetic. You move through life in a way that feels intuitive, even when it's rebellious. Your boldness gives others permission to take risks. Your curiosity makes people feel alive again. Your contradictions confuse some, but captivate many. And that energy, it's addictive. Even to those who don't want to admit, they're drinking from your well. Let's take Noah, a Gemini who always had a playful but thoughtful way of speaking. He had a talent for naming things before others saw them, for expressing what everyone else felt but couldn't articulate. His coworker often teased him, rolled her eyes at his dramatics. But one day, she was leading a team meeting, and word for word, she used his metaphor. It wasn't just influence, it was imitation. And when Noah called it out, she replied, "I don't even remember you saying that." But she did, and so do they. This is a Gemini paradox. You are both dismissed and emulated. People minimize you in conversation, but build their persona from your blueprint. And the more you glow, the more they distance themselves, because the closer they get, the more obvious their mirroring becomes. So how do you move through this? With grace, but without self-abandonment. You don't need to confront every echo of yourself you see in others. You don't need to demand recognition from those who lack the maturity to give it. But you do need to stop pretending it doesn't matter. Because when you constantly allow others to harvest your light without reciprocity, you begin to question whether your light is worth protecting. It is. And here's the shift. From now on, let imitation be confirmation, not confusion. Let the echoes of your voice and others affirm that your expression is powerful. Let the recycled ideas remind you that you are ahead of the curve. Let the emotional distance others create be a sign that your evolution is too honest for their comfort. You are not here to be flattered by copies. You are here to be deeply seen by originals, by those who don't just absorb your energy, but offer their own in return, by those who say, "That moved me," instead of pretending they found it first. Gemini, you are not invisible. You are unforgettable. And those who can't give you your flowers while you're blooming, let them plant their silence elsewhere. Because where you're going, admiration isn't whispered, it's honored. Gate 5, reclaiming your influence, rewriting your circle. Gemini, now that you've seen through the masks, the silence, the imitation, the criticism disguised as care, you arrive at a powerful threshold. This is where everything shifts. Because you no longer just understand what's been happening around you, you begin to consciously choose how you respond. And that is where your true influence starts, not in being watched, but in walking with intention. You spent years shaping spaces for others, making them feel comfortable, inspiring them with your ideas, holding room for their complexity while hiding parts of your own. You've been the muse, the mirror, the mood maker. And yet, too often, you've been left unacknowledged in the story you helped everyone else write. But Gemini, no more. This is a season where you reclaim authorship of your own narrative, and you begin by rewriting the cast. Not everyone gets to walk with you into the next chapter, not because you're bitter, but because you're clear. You're done shrinking to be digestible. You're done over-explaining your joy. You're done performing for an audience that only claps when no one else is in the room. You're no longer interested in people who admire you in secret and compete with you in public. You're no longer available for connections built on comparison instead of collaboration. The circle you're building now is rooted in mutual elevation, not energetic extraction. Think of Julian, a Gemini who was known in his friend group as a connector. He introduced people, sparked creative ideas, elevated every space he entered. But when Julian began claiming his own spotlight, publishing his work, setting clearer boundaries, he noticed a shift. Friends grew distant. A few mocked his ambitions. One even said, "You've changed." And Julian had. He was no longer willing to be the background music to other people's main act. So he stopped trying to win back those who were never clapping for him in the first place. Instead, he poured that energy into the people who saw him fully, the ones who weren't threatened by his voice, but thrilled by it, the ones who didn't just want his magic, they wanted to share theirs, too. And in that space, Julian's confidence didn't just grow, it rooted. Gemini, this is what's waiting for you now. A life where your influence is recognized, not resented. Relationships where admiration is expressed, not hidden. Rooms where your ideas are credited, your presence respected, your light reflected back with love, not stolen in silence. To build this life, you don't need to beg. You simply need to believe that you deserve it. Let go of the emotional entanglements that confuse love with possession, support with surveillance, closeness with competition. Let go of needing to convince anyone of your value. The people who see you clearly don't need proof. They only need your presence. From this moment forward, you lead from knowing, not hoping. You create from wholeness, not performance. You speak without apologizing. You shine without shrinking. And you stop seeking applause from those whose silence was never about you. It was about their own shadows. This is your liberation, Gemini, no longer waiting to be celebrated by the ones who never had the courage to say your name aloud. Your presence is its own proof. Your truth is its own spotlight. And your soul, it is already drawing in the kind of people who can meet you as an equal, not a threat. The question isn't, who secretly admires me? Anymore, the question is, who is brave enough to celebrate me openly? That is your new filter. That is your new circle. Conclusion, you are never seeking applause, only alignment. Gemini, you walk through a forest of quiet glances, unsaid praises, borrowed words, and vague criticisms. You felt both the warmth of admiration and the cold of its denial. And now, standing on the other side of that journey, something within you softens, not from surrender, but from sovereignty. Because you finally see, you were never truly seeking their applause. You were seeking resonance. You were seeking truth. You were seeking spaces where you didn't have to dim your light to feel safe. And in that seeking, you found something far more powerful than validation. You found clarity. Clarity that some people study you more than they support you. Clarity that imitation is not always flattery. It can be hunger. Clarity that criticism, when vague and repetitive, often says more about the critic than the subject. And above all, clarity that your presence is a frequency. Not everyone is ready to match. But now, you are ready to stop waiting for them to catch up. You are ready to step fully into your energy, knowing that your light might blind some, but will guide others. You're no longer shrinking to be palatable. You're no longer performing subtle acts of self-erasure to avoid discomfort. You are here to be felt, to be real, to be free. Gemini, you don't need their recognition to rise. You rise because it's who you are. You inspire even when you're quiet. You awaken something in others, even when they deny it. And whether they admit it or not, you are the reference, the blueprint, the signal that change is possible. So let them admire from a distance. Let them watch. Let them whisper. Your work is not to wait for their approval. Your work is to become so aligned with your truth that even silence affirms it. Your work is to walk forward, eyes soft, heart open, voice steady, into rooms that reflect your value without you having to negotiate it. And when you do, you'll find them, the ones who see you and say it, the ones who honor you without hesitation, the ones who don't just reflect your light, but help it grow. This is the circle you were always meant for. And this is the life that begins when you stop needing to be admired and start choosing to be aligned.